The message arrives at 7:32. I'm really sorry, I'm almost there. Maya has been sitting at the restaurant since 7. The table is only available until 8:30, so by the time Daniel arrives, nearly half of the time they plan to spend together will already be gone. This has happened before. After the last time, Maya told him explicitly, "It really bothers me when you're late." Daniel remembers that conversation. When he finally arrives, he makes sure to apologize carefully. He explains the delay, acknowledges the inconvenience, and makes clear that he did not take their plans lightly. And while the apology is sincere, it is aimed at the wrong part of the problem. Maya was not mainly waiting for stronger remorse after the delay had already happened. She wanted a message early enough to leave her home later, call the restaurant, or change the plan before most of the reservation was gone. Daniel had understood the earlier concern differently. He heard something closer to, "When you arrive late, it makes me feel that my time does not matter." So he responded with acknowledgement. He tried to show that the plans mattered and that the waiting had not been dismissed. Maya meant something more practical. "Tell me when the delay becomes likely, while I can still decide what to do." One person is trying to acknowledge the impact, the other wanted information that could reduce it. A response can make sense from the words used and still miss the problem those words were meant to address. This kind of mismatch can look like poor listening. Sometimes a clear request has been understood and simply not followed, but it is not the only structure available. Maya's earlier sentence was emotionally clear. Lateness mattered, and it created frustration. What remained unclear was what response would count as addressing it. Was she asking for punctuality under all conditions, an explanation when something went wrong, a stronger apology, or a message when a delay became more likely? The concern contained several possible problems, and the language did not separate them, so Daniel selected one. He understood the main issue as lack of acknowledgement. From that perspective, a careful apology was a reasonable response. It showed that the waiting had been noticed, and that the delay was not being treated casually. Maya was using another standard. For her, the central problem was preventable uncertainty. What she needed was information early enough to make another choice. Both of them were now evaluating the same interaction through different versions of the problem. Maya thought, "You still don't understand what I have been asking for," while Daniel thought, "I understand. I'm taking responsibility. What else am I supposed to do?" The conflict could intensify even further as both people try to resolve this. Maya compresses a concern into a sentence. Daniel reconstructs the problem from the words available. He responds to that problem. Maya then judges the response against a different problem that remained partly unspoken. So the effort here is real, yet the target is different. Language always leaves something out. A person may carry a whole situation internally: the waiting, the uncertainty, the lost time, the feeling that the evening cannot begin. They may also be thinking about what they could have done differently if they had known sooner. Then, all of that is compressed into, "It bothers me when you're late." And while this sentence is not false, it simply preserves some distinctions and loses others. Internally, Maya may not have fully separated those parts either. Daniel's failed response is what reveals that the apology was never the thing she was waiting for. The mismatch can clarify the concern after the fact. Daniel then has to rebuild the concern from the words that remain. He may use context, previous experience, and whatever meaning seems most likely. This is not an error added after communication, it is part of how communication works. Words do not transfer the full internal situation. They give another person enough material to construct a version of it. Usually, that construction is close enough. The problem appears when an omitted distinction determines the response. The lateness and the lack of notice affect the evening in different ways. An apology can acknowledge what all has already happened. Advance notice can preserve choices before it happens. When that distinction stays hidden, a person can improve exactly what they understood and leave the central concern unchanged. The same structure appears in more formal contexts as well. A manager might tell an employee, I need you to communicate better. The employee takes the feedback seriously. They begin sending more updates, copying the manager into more emails, and reporting routine progress in greater detail. A few weeks later, a deadline is missed because a blocker was not raised early enough. The manager becomes frustrated again. From their side, the feedback has not landed. The employee sees the situation differently. They have communicated more, just as requested. Meanwhile, what the manager meant was closer to tell me as soon as you know that a blocker may affect a deadline, so I can make decision while there is still time. The employee may have heard, give me more visibility into your work. Again, neither target is unreasonable. Better communication can mean more frequent information, earlier escalation, more detailed, or clearer request for decisions. The phrase points towards a general area while leaving the operational difference unsettled. More communication was not the same intervention as earlier warning. A short sentence can feel efficient because it takes little time to say. But if it removes the distinction that controls the other person's response, the missing detail returns later as confusion, repeated effort, and repair. The longer version may be more efficient overall. I do not need more routine updates. I need to know when a blocker may affect the deadline while there is still time to choose what to do, the manager might say. That sentence does not reproduce the manager's full internal state. It does something more limited. It narrows the range of reasonable problems the employee might try to solve. But even then, precision does not guarantee resolution. The employee may understand the request and still believe that every small risk should not be escalated. They may lack the judgment to recognize a serious blocker early. They may fear being blamed for raising a bad news. They may disagree about who owns the decision. At that point, repeating communicate better in more polished language will not necessarily help. The problem may no longer be shared understanding. This boundary matters because conversations often keep returning to explanations after comprehension has already been reached. One person continues clarifying because the desired response has not appeared. The other continues saying, I understand, while acting differently from what was requested. Sometimes that means the explanation is still unclear. Sometimes it also can mean that the answer is no, the capacity is missing, or another concern has greater weight. The distinction becomes visible when Daniel can accurately describe the relevant part of Maya's concern. She wants to know early enough to adjust her plans. At that point, the earlier ambiguity has largely been removed. What happens next belongs to a different conversation. Daniel may agree. He may explain why advance warning is not always possible. They may negotiate what counts as enough notice. Or the conversation may reveal that the request matters less to him than it does to Maya. Clarity cannot settle all of that. What it can do is stop one kind of failure from being mistaken for another. Without a shared target, effort becomes difficult to read. Maya sees the same problem continuing and may interpret Daniel's response as indifference. Daniel sees continued dissatisfaction despite visible effort and may interpret Maya's standard as unstable or impossible. So then the conflict begins producing claims about the people involved. You never listen. Nothing I do is enough. Those claims may eventually point toward the real pattern, but they can also form around a simpler mismatch that has not yet been made visible. The apology may be genuine, the extra updates may be real. The problem can still remain untouched because the response is being aimed somewhere beside it. That leaves one question inside many unresolved conversations. Before deciding that someone does not care or that the other person can never be satisfied, have both people been using the same definition of what the problem is and the same standard for what would count as addressing it?